Year 1. Beginnings of Prophecy. The Prophet would, on many occasions, retreat to a state of seclusion in the mountains around the Aqaba, which would often serve as a source of comfort from the disturbing things he would witness living amongst his pagan neighbours. Here he would contemplate on the metaphysical and worship God in imitation of his forefather Abraham, hoping that the Makkans would see the faults of their ways. The commencement of divine inspiration began 6 months before his 40th birthday. It began in the form of dreams and visions, which would come true the following day, and this lasted a total of 6 months. It was even before this that the Prophet began to long for seclusion. He would retreat to a nearby cave named Hira for periods of time, taking with him light provisions. Then, one day, whilst in a state of meditation, he realized that he wasn't alone. Looking up, he saw a bright light. An angel had come to him, ordering him to read. The Prophet replied, alarmed, "I do not know how to read." Already startled by the presence of the angel, he attempted to make sense of the situation. But before his thoughts could gather, the angel took hold of him powerfully, gripping him tightly with unbearable force. The Prophet, reaching the point where he felt his body could endure no more, was released and ordered to read again, but replied, "I do not know how to read." Thereupon, the angel clutched at his warping body and then released him and again asked him to read. But the Prophet had nothing to say except the truth. "I do not know how to read." On the third and final ordeal, the angel released the Prophet, saying, "Recite in the name of your Lord, who created man from a blood clot. Recite, and your Lord is the most generous. He who taught by the pen taught man what he did not know." This new messenger of God, being startled by the incident, stumbled out of the cave with his heart thumping, causing his chest to shake and his eyes unable to focus. Fear had gripped him, and he began to wonder whether this had been some sort of hallucination. But everywhere he looked on the horizon, the angel would appear before him. Feeling as though he was one smitten with madness, he returned home, stumbling down the mountain, with sweat pouring down his head. His legs shook uncontrollably, and his body quivered out of fright. Upon reaching his house, his wife, Khadija, received him as he staggered into his abode, saying, "Cover me, cover me." She wrapped him up until the state of terror had left him, and then he described to Khadija everything that had happened, saying, "I fear for myself." Khadija replied words undeniably comforting to his heart. "No, by God, God would never bring disgrace upon you. You maintain ties of kinship, bear people's burdens, help the destitute, give hospitality to your guests, and help those who have been afflicted by calamities." Seeing the despair of her husband, Khadija was quite understandably taken aback. So, in seeking counsel, she went with Muhammad to Waraka ibn Nawfal, her blind and old cousin, who was a devout Christian. Khadija said to Waraka, "Cousin, listen to your nephew," at which point he said, "Nephew, what have you seen?" The Prophet described to him everything he had seen. Waraka then said to him, "This is the namus which God sent to Moses. I wish that I was still young. I wish I might still be alive when your people drive you out." The messenger of God asked, "Will they drive me out?" He said, "Yes. No man has brought anything similar to what you have brought without being treated with hostility. If I am still alive on that day, I will give you my strong support." However, shortly thereafter, Waraka passed away. The reassurances from Khadija and Waraka were followed by a reassurance from heaven in the form of a second revelation, after which there was a period of silence. During that period, the Prophet began to fear that he had incurred the displeasure of God, because the revelation had stopped. Then, at last, the silence was broken, and there came further reassurance. Year 2. Private Propagation. With Makkah being the hub of the Arabs, it was also the capital of idols and stone-graven images. The Prophet knew very well the difficulty of the mission that lay ahead of him. Working in such an atmosphere, the call to Islam assumed a cloak of secrecy to ensure a gradual system of conversion in a manner that would make it difficult for Quraysh, the Makkan tribe, to interfere. The Prophet logically began his divine task at home and then moved on to close associates. It was these people who responded to the divine call and readily embraced this new faith. From amongst those who converted during the beginnings of the divine call were Khadija, the Prophet's wife, his adopted son, Zayd bin Haritha, his cousin, Ali bin Abi Talib, and his cherished friend, Abu Bakr. These were the individuals who professed Islam on the very first day of the call. Thereafter, Abu Bakr, through his own personal efforts, invited Uthman ibn Affan, Al-Zubair bin Awam, Abdur Rahman bin Auf, Sa'ad ibn Abi Waqqas, and Talha ibn Ubaydullah. Among the early Muslims were also Bilal bin Rabah, Abu Ubaidah bin Al-Jarrah, Al-Arkam bin Abi Al-Arkam, Fatima bint Al-Khattab, the sister of Umar bin Al-Khattab, Khabab bin Al-Arat, Abdullah bin Masud, and many others. Year 3. Life in Makkah. The Prophet used to meet and teach the new converts in privacy, because the call to Islam was still based upon concealment. He would tell his followers not to divulge his secret without permission. Now the revelation began to increase in speed, and continued to come down to the Prophet sometimes like the reverberations of a bell, which was the hardest on him. Other times, Gabriel would come to him in the form of a man and speak to him. The impulse which had prompted him to cry out, cover me," still came to him at times. The constant revealing of verses enabled the Prophet and his companions to memorize and act out the message in ease. The verses revolved around subservience to God, the life of the hereafter, and prophethood. The effect of this was that the early converts would have constant revelation concerning their predicament, a phenomenon that established for them that God was truly with them, close, and ever aware of what was happening. They were taught to greet one another with the words given to the Prophet by Gabriel as the greeting of the people of paradise, "Peace be on you," to which one would answer, "And on you be peace." This year was a year of cultivation, in that God was preparing the Prophet and his followers for what they would face once the call would be made openly. It was this cultivation that made the converts sincere, ever ready to face trials, and willing to accept death rather than turn to polytheism. Indeed, this cultivation stood many a trial, and many early converts were killed due to their unshakable stance and resolute faith. Year 4. The end of private propagation. Even though the call was conducted in a clandestine manner and on an individual basis, it leaked out and began to attract wide public interest. At first, the leaders of Makkah cared little for Muhammad's call, likening him to a religious philosophizer. But such indifference soon altered once they realized the ramifications of his call. The elite became particularly disturbed by his call to end idolatry, as for them it was through the status of Makkah being the hub of idol worship that it brought with it great economic standing. Thus, Quraysh, the Makkan tribe, began to closely observe Muhammad's activities. Preceding 3 years of secret propagation, the Prophet had managed to cultivate a band of believers who emerged steadfast, imbued with the spirit of monotheism and activism. It was at this time that the angel Gabriel brought to the Prophet further revelation, the command of God for Muhammad to openly confront his people, negate their creed, abolish idolatrous practices, and establish monotheism in word and deed. The time had now come to preach Islam openly. Quraysh would try to prevent the message spreading amongst the masses by scoffing, ridiculing, belying, and denouncing the Prophet as a man being insane, possessed by a spirit, or merely soothsayer or poet. However, Such attempts only served to cause Muhammad to be even more steadfast in his call. So, in a change of tactic, the pagans invited him to compromise, whereby all would accept the religion of the other and worship all gods inclusively. On realizing the futility of all their tactics, the pagans decided to implement an unrestrained campaign of resistance. They called for a general meeting and elected a committee of 25 Qurayshite nobles with Abu Lahab, the Prophet's uncle, as a chairman. Following discussions, they decided to utilize all channels of resistance at their disposal, from maligning the Messenger of God to the use of torture for the weak amongst his followers. The Prophet had the support and protection of his compassionate uncle Abu Talib and his clan, which held the idolaters at bay to some extent. For instance, Abu Lahab would throw stones at the Prophet, made his 2 sons divorce their wives Ruqayya and Kulthum, the Prophet's daughters, gloat over the death of the Prophet's 2nd son, calling him the man cut off from offspring, and belie him openly during the pilgrimage seasons. This campaign continued for 2 years, only increasing in intensity. Other idolaters who were also related to the Prophet indulged in the campaign of tyranny. Once, whilst the Prophet was prostrating himself praying in the Aqaba, Abu Jahl asked his companions to bring the dirty intestines of a she-camel and place it on his back, at which Uqba hastened to the ignoble deed. Whilst the infidels expressed their amusement at this depraved act, the Prophet's daughter, Fatima, removed the filth from her father's back and wept. The Prophet responded to her sorrow and said, "Don't worry, your Lord will take care of his Prophet." Every clan would target its own converts and would persecute them. Banu Makhzum took out Ammar ibn Yasir and his mother and father, who were all Muslims, into the midday heat. They tortured them, and Ammar's mother, Sumayya, was killed in the process. She became the first martyr in the history of Islam. In light of such inhuman persecutions, the Prophet advised the believers to conceal their conversion. He decided to meet with them secretly and took several measures to maintain their safety. He further avoided confrontation with the polytheists, as the call was in its initial stages and the Muslims were still vulnerable, and some not even fully fledged. One day, the Muslims were on their way to the hillocks of Makkah to hold a clandestine meeting with the Prophet, when a group of polytheists noted their suspicious movement and began to abuse them. In defense, Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas struck one of the polytheists with the jawbone of a camel and wounded him. This was the first bloodshed in Islam. But after that, the Prophet advised his companions to refrain from violence, until God decided otherwise. Year 5. The First Migration. Although the converts now hid their faith, the Prophet, on the other hand, would promulgate the Islamic faith and preach it openly with strong commitment and assiduous pursuit. But for the general welfare of the new converts, and considering the strategic benefit to the new faith, he took Dar al-Arqam, the house of al-Arqam, in the Safa mountain, as a provisional place where he would meet the believers, furtively instructing them with the divine message from God and the prophetic ways. The oppressive nature of the idolaters intensified so much that torture and murder now became routine. Thus, Muhammad directed the Muslims to escape to Abyssinia, the Christian kingdom, where a king rules without injustice, a land of truthfulness, until God leads us to a way out of our difficulty. Fearful of persecution and desiring to worship God in peace and freedom, a number of Muslims immigrated to Abyssinia upon the Prophet's advice. In the month of Rajab, 12 men and 4 women, headed by Uthman ibn Affan and his wife Ruqayya, the daughter of the Prophet, secretly left Makkah. They were also the first family to immigrate for the sake of God, since the prophets Abraham and Lut immigrated with their households. The immigrants made their way to a port south of Jeddah and managed to secure 2 merchant ships that took them to Abyssinia, where they lived under the protection of the Negus, with freedom to worship until they heard a rumour that the Quraysh had been converted. However, the news that reached them was not as it seemed, and when they returned, they found the Quraysh to be even more fervent in their persecution of the believers. Some of the believers returned to Abyssinia, and others secretly stayed in Makkah. With intensified oppression, the Prophet advised emigration once more, and this time 82 or 83 men and 18 women departed. This larger group of Muslims arrived in Abyssinia despite all efforts exerted by the pagans to stop them, and so Quraysh sent Amr ibn al-As and Abdullah ibn Rabi'a to reason with the king and ensure the return of the emigrants. The king summoned the emigrants and questioned them concerning what the two emissaries had said. It was with great courage and eloquence that Ja'far responded on behalf of the believers to the king's question about their new religion. He said, "O king, we were a people steeped in ignorance, worshipping idols, eating unsacrificed carrion, committing abominations, and the strong would devour the weak. Thus we were, until God sent us a messenger from out our midst, one whose lineage we knew, and his veracity and his worthiness of trust and his integrity. He called us unto God, that we should testify to his oneness and worship him alone, and renounce what we and our fathers had worshipped. And he commanded us to speak truly, to fulfill our promises, to respect the ties of kinship and the rights of our neighbours, and to refrain from crimes and from bloodshed. For these reasons have our people turned against us, and have persecuted us to forsake our religion, and revert from the worship of God to the worship of idols. That is why we came to thy country, having chosen thee above all others." He then recited to the Negus some verses from the Quranic chapter of Mary, whereupon the king and his bishops began to weep. The king then swore that he would not deliver them to Quraysh. Year 6. Hamza and Umar accept Islam. The conversion of Hamza and Umar did much to further the cause of the religion, and it was by these two men that God restored a sense of honour and pride to the believers. Hamza's conversion, although initially proclaimed out of anger due to the oppression of his kin, proved to be extremely fruitful in strengthening Islam and the Muslims. It came about through an incident that occurred at the Aqaba between the Prophet, who was one day seated on the hillock of Safa, when Abu Jahl passed by and insulted Islam. The Prophet kept quiet, choosing not to engage Abu Jahl in his vain talk, an act which incensed him. So he took a stone and struck the Prophet's head, which began to bleed. Abu Jahl then left to join the Quraysh at their assembly place. Hamza happened to be returning from a hunting trip when a slave girl belonging to Abdullah bin Jadan informed him of what had happened. On being deeply offended, he hastened to the Aqaba, where he found the aggressor sitting in the courtyard of the holy sanctuary. Hamza rushed upon him and violently struck Abu Jahl on the head, saying, "Ah, you insult Muhammad when I too follow his religion." His conversion proved to be a source of great strength to the Islamic faith and its adherents, and he himself came to be known as the Lion of God. The conversion of Umar bin al-Khattab took place 3 days subsequent to the conversion of Hamza. He was at this time about 26 years old, a man of courage who was feared and respected with decisive resolution. Unlike his uncle Abu Jahl, he was deeply pious and, as such, though a bitter opponent of the new religion, would at times feel various contradictory emotions within his soul. An example of this is once when Umar was in the holy sanctuary, where he saw the Prophet offering prayer. He thought it would be a good idea to hide behind the curtain of the Aqaba and jump out at Muhammad to scare him. However, as he got closer, he could hear him reciting the Quranic chapter Al-Harqa and was amazed by the words of God. But being irrational, he thought to himself, "This must be the words of an exceptional poet," at which the Prophet recited the verse, "It is not the word of a poet, little is that you believe." Shocked at the Prophet's statement, and quite certain that the Prophet knew nothing of his presence, he thought to himself the Prophet must be a soothsayer. But as the thought crossed his mind, the Prophet recited, "Nor is it the word of a foreteller, little is that you remember." The Prophet continued, "This is the revelation sent down from the Lord of the worlds." Although Islam had now permeated his heart, the deep-seated bigotry he held rendered him unable to submit to the truth, and thus persisted in his oppression of Muslims, filled with loathing. His sharp temper and excessive enmity towards Muhammad led him one day to hunt for him. With a sword in hand, he left his home. However, he didn't get far when he was informed that his brother-in-law and his sister had abandoned polytheism in favor of Islam. So Umar changed his course, setting it towards his sister's house. As he drew near, he could hear the Qur'an being recited, and entered angrily and uninvited. Full of rage, he fell upon his brother-in-law, beating him severely. But Fatima, his sister, rushed to the rescue of her husband, when Umar fell upon his sister and struck her on her head. Realizing fighting back was futile, the couple cried out, "Yes, we are Muslims. We believe in God and His Messenger Muhammad, so do as you will." Upon seeing the face of his sister besmeared with blood, he felt regret, full of shame. He said softly, as if to extend an olive branch, "Let me see what you are reading, so that I may see what Muhammad has brought." They complied with his request, but only after they had made him wash, since he was unclean. Upon doing so, he was given the parchment, which he took and began to read, from the opening verses of the chapter Taha, until he reached, "Verily I am God. None has the right to be worshipped but I. So worship me and offer prayers for my remembrance." Umar read the verses with awe, and the seed of Islam had finally begun to sprout in his heart. "How excellent it is, and how graceful. Please guide me to Muhammad," he said. On hearing his statement, Khabbab came out of concealment and said, "O Umar, I hope that God has answered the prayer of the Prophet, for I heard him say, 'O God, strengthen Islam through the one most beloved to you, either Umar bin al-Khattab or Abu Jahl bin Hisham.'" Umar then left for Dar al-Arqam, where the Prophet had been holding secret meetings along with his companions. Umar reached there with his sword swinging by his arm. He knocked at the door, and the companions of the Prophet turned to see who the intruder was. One of them peeped through a chink in the door and shrieked, "It's Umar with his sword!" Hamza, being the lion he was, said, "Open the door. If he intends good, he shall find it here, and if he intends evil, he will be killed with his own sword." On entering, he stated his intentions, saying, "O Messenger of God, I come to you in order to believe in God and His Messenger, and that which He has brought from His Lord." Filled with delight, all cried out, "God is great," so loud that even those in the holy sanctuary heard. Umar's conversion had a tremendous impact on the situation of the believers. Abdullah ibn Abbas related that he had asked Umar bin al-Khattab why he had been given the epithet of Al-Faruq, he who distinguishes truth from falsehood. He replied, "After I had embraced Islam, I asked the Prophet, 'Aren't we on the right path in this world and the hereafter?' The Prophet answered, 'Of course you are. I swear by God in whose hand my soul is, that you are right in this world and in the hereafter.' I therefore asked the Prophet why we then had to conduct our activities secretly. 'I swear by God who has sent you with the truth, that we will leave our concealment and proclaim our noble cause publicly.' We then went out in 2 groups, Hamza leading one and I the other. We headed for the mosque in broad daylight. When the polytheists of Quraysh saw us, their faces became pale with resentment. On that very occasion, the Prophet attached to me the epithet of Al-Faruq. Year 7. Boycotting the Muslim community. Quraysh gathered together, having reached the end of their tether, to confer on how best to proceed from Muhammad's refusal to cooperate. They drew up a document in which they vowed to boycott Banu Hashim, and the Banu al-Muttalib, whereby they would not marry their women, nor give women in marriage to them, or sell anything to them, or buy anything from them. They drew up this written contract and solemnly pledged themselves to observe it, hanging it up in the interior of the Kaaba, so as to make it even more binding. This caused Banu Hashim and the Banu al-Muttalib to join Abu Talib to retreat into his valley, but Abu Lahab, also from the Banu Hashim, abandoned his clan and instead sided with Quraysh, supporting them against Prophet Muhammad and his allies. Year 8. Boycotting the Muslim community. Having withdrawn to a valley on the eastern outskirts of Makkah, the believers found themselves part of the stifling siege. The supply of food was almost stopped, and the people in confinement faced great hardships. The idolaters used to buy whatever food commodities entered Makkah, so as to ensure those who were being boycotted wouldn't receive any. The boycotted were so overstrained that they eventually began to eat leaves of trees and skins of animals in order to survive. Cries of little children suffering from hunger could be heard. It was only on a few occasions that meagre quantities of food would be smuggled to them by some compassionate Makkans. During the prohibited months, when hostilities traditionally ceased, they would leave their confinement and buy food coming from outside Makkah, although foodstuff was unjustly overpriced, so that their financial situation would still make them fall short. Despite all odds, the Prophet persisted in his call, with his determination and bravery never being weakened. He continued to go to the Kaaba to pray publicly, and used every opportunity to preach to outsiders who visited Makkah for business or on pilgrimage during the sacred months. Year 9. Boycotting the Muslim community. The boycott created much dissent amongst the various Makkan tribes, who were connected to the besieged by way of blood relations. It had, moreover, the undesired and unforeseen effect of drawing further attention to the Prophet, and of causing the new religion to be talked of more than ever throughout Arabia. In the month of Muharram, after nearly 3 years, the pact was finally broken. From the motivation of blood relations, there emerged a group of 5 people who set out to abrogate the pact and declare all relevant clauses null and void. They were Hisham bin Amr, who so often would send camels laden with food and clothes for the boycotted, Zuhair bin Abi Umayyah, Al-Mutim bin Adi, Abu al-Bukhtari, and Zama bin al-Aswad. They decided to meet in their assembly place and initiated their mission from the very precinct of the sacred house. Zuhair, after circumambulating 7 times around the Kaaba, approached the gatherings of people there and reproved them for indulging whilst their relatives from Banu Hashim were suffering under starvation and economic boycott. The other 4 accomplices then stood up, one after the other, in a staged event, showing their support for him and denouncing those who spoke against Zuhair. Although the 5 tried their best, Abu Jahl hastily tried to dissuade the audience in order to ward off their noble attempts, and began to accuse them of having plotted it all overnight. Mutim cut him short by going into the Kaaba to fetch the document. He came out in triumph with a small piece of vellum in his hand. The worms had eaten the ban, all but the opening words, "In thy name, O God." Most of Quraysh had been virtually won over already, and this unquestionable omen was a final and altogether decisive argument. Abu Jahl and 1 or 2 like-minded men knew that it would be in vain to resist. The ban was formally revoked, and a body of Quraysh went to give the good news to Bani Hashim and Bani al-Muttalib. Although tensions in Makkah were relaxed after the ban was lifted, hostilities against the Muslims still continued. The leaders of the Quraysh continued to try and persuade the Prophet to agree to a compromise, even proposing that they should all practice both religions. Their efforts were in vain, as the Prophet could not and would not compromise on matters of faith and clear divine guidance. Year 10. The Year of Deep Sorrow. The difficulties of the Prophet and his followers did not come to an end after the annulment of the ban. 6 months after the end of the boycott, Abu Talib fell ill, and it soon became clear that he was dying. The strain of the boycott had proved too heavy for him. It was at this time that a deputation of Quraysh visited him at his deathbed. It was here that they inclined to offer terms of peace to Muhammad, on the condition that he refrained from criticizing their faith and their gods. However, there could be no such agreement for the Prophet, as there was no God but God, and all other gods were false. The Prophet then longed for his uncle to accept Islam, and so he called upon him once again to embrace it. He seemed to lend him an ear, but was cut short by Abu Lahab and his ilk, and so he stuck to the religion of his people, and died upon this. A short while after the death of Abu Talib, Khadijah, the wife of the Prophet, the mother of the believers, also passed away. The deaths of Abu Talib and Khadijah marked the end of an era. Abu Talib had been more than a father to the Prophet, and, in spite of the strong pressure of Quraysh, he had protected him to the last breath, even leaving a bequest in his favour. Khadijah had been for the Prophet more than a wife. She placed her wealth at his disposal. Never faltering, she showered him with love, honour and support. Not only was she the mother of his children, she was also his most sincere adviser and an ardent believer. The passing away of Abu Talib and Khadijah created a great vacuum in the life of the Prophet. The loneliness he once felt in the cave of Hira had returned. The intensity of his grief was so great that the year of the deaths of Abu Talib and Khadijah came to be known as the Year of Sorrow. These two painful events took place within a short space of time and added to his grief. The Makkans, now with the Prophet's protector absent, openly declared their campaign of torture and oppression. It was then that he decided to seek help from Thaqif, the people of Taif, the guardians of the temple goddess Allah. In the month of Shawwal, Muhammad set out towards Taif, about 60 kilometers from Makkah. He approached the welcoming orchards and gardens and cornfields in the company of his freed slave, Zayd bin Haritha, inviting people to Islam. Contrary to his expectations, the general atmosphere was that of hostility. He approached various notables, all of whom rejected his call. He remained amongst them for 10 days, but all to no purpose. Stirred up to hasten the departure of the unwelcome visitor, the people hooted him through the alleyways, pelted him with stones, and obliged him to flee from the city, pursued by a relentless rabble. Blood flowed down his body, and Zayd, endeavouring to shield him, was also wounded in the head. The mob would not desist until they had chased him 2 or 3 miles across the sandy plains to the foot of the surrounding hills. There, wearied and exhausted, he took refuge in one of the numerous orchards and rested against the wall of a vineyard. Year 11. The first people from Yathrib accept Islam. In the year that followed the year of sadness, the pilgrimage fell at the beginning of summer. It had been the Prophet's practice now for several years to visit the various groups and to declare his message to any who would listen, reciting for them verses of the Revelations. The nearest point from Mina to Makkah is Aqaba, where the road rises up steeply from the valley towards the hills in the direction of the holy city. And it was this year at Aqaba that the Prophet came upon 6 men of the tribe of Khazraj from Yathrib. He told them about Islam and called on them to submit to Islamic monotheism. Their faces lit up with interest, and they listened to him intently, saying to one another, "By God, this is the same thing that the Jews informed us. Indeed, nobody should now get ahead of us." They accepted his teachings and embraced Islam. They also said to the Prophet, "We have left our people, for there are no people so torn asunder by enmity and evil as they, and it may be that God will unite them through you. We will now go to them and summon them to accept the religion as we have accepted it. And if God unites them together through you, then no man will be more honoured than you." The 6 men of Khazraj delivered the message of Islam to as many of their people as would listen to them. And the next summer, 5 of them repeated their pilgrimage, bringing with them 7 others, 2 of whom were from the tribe of Aus. At Aqaba, these 12 men pledged themselves to the Prophet, and this pledge is known as the first Aqaba. We pledged our allegiance to the Messenger of God on the night of the first Aqaba, that we would associate nothing with God as partner, that we would neither commit theft nor fornication, nor to kill their own children, and we would obey him in what was right. When these people left for Medina, the Prophet sent Musab ibn Umair with them to teach the Qur'an to the people there, to expound Islam and instruct them about the religion. The timing of the call was perfect, since it took place at a critical juncture when God afforded the opportunity of helping and defending Islam to both the Aus and the Khazraj, and in effect crushed their own petty squabbling. It was by various causes and circumstances such as this that Almighty God opened the door of acceptance by those who were inherently kind-hearted and sweet-tempered, immune from the Qurayshite traits of immoderation, stubbornness and vanity, and hence the people of Yathrib were responsive and open to reason. Year 12, the Night of Ascension. The Prophet loved to visit the Kaaba, and one night after praying, he was overcome with sleep, and he lay down beside it. "Whilst I was sleeping in the Hijr," he said, "Gabriel came to me and spurred me with his foot, whereupon I sat upright. The angel then cut open his body from the top of the chest downwards. He then took out the Prophet's heart and washed it in a golden basin, and then filled it with faith and sealed his body. He then led him out to the gate of the mosque, and there was a white beast named Burak, between a mule and an ass, with large wings on either side, and his every stride was as far as his eye could see. The Prophet was carried on it, and Gabriel set out with him till they reached Jerusalem at speed. Then they were met by a group of prophets, Abraham, Moses, Jesus, and others, and when he prayed on the site of the holy mosque, they gathered behind him for prayer. Then Muhammad was taken up to heaven, led by the archangel, who now revealed himself as a heavenly being. They ascended beyond earthly space and time, and as they passed through the heavens, they met some of the prophets. Each time he met another prophet, he would extend greetings to them, and they would reply, "You are welcomed, O pious son and pious prophet." Then he was made to ascend to Sidrat al-Muntaha, the lote tree of the utmost boundary. Its fruits were like the jars of Hajra, a place near Medina, and its leaves were as big as the ears of elephants. Gabriel said, "This is the lote tree of the utmost boundary." There ran 4 rivers. 2 were hidden, and 2 were visible. The Prophet asked, "What are these 2 kinds of rivers, O Gabriel?" He replied, "As for the hidden rivers, they are 2 rivers in paradise, and the visible rivers are the Nile and the Euphrates." Then Al-Bayt ul-Ma'mur, the sacred house, was shown to him, and a container full of wine, another full of milk, and a third full of honey were brought to the Prophet. He took the milk. Gabriel remarked, "This is the Islamic religion which you and your followers are following." Then 50 prayers were enjoined on the Prophet, at which Moses remarked, "Your followers cannot bear 50 prayers a day, and by God I have tested people before you, and I have tried my level best with the children of Israel in vain. Go back to your Lord and ask for reduction to lessen your followers' burden." So the Prophet returned continuously, until he was ordered to observe 5 prayers a day. The Prophet was then transported back to his earthly station. Year 13. Promise of help and support from Medina. The 13th year saw a greater number of pilgrims from Yathrib, 73 men and 2 women. Secretly, Muhammad contacted the leaders of the group, and they agreed to meet at Al-Aqaba during the night on the 2nd day following the pilgrimage. The Muslims of Yathrib kept the meeting secret, stealing themselves away under the cover of the night. When they reached Aqaba, men and women ascended the mountain awaiting the arrival of the Prophet. The Prophet arrived with his uncle Abbas, who had not yet converted to Islam. He knew from his nephew that this meeting was to conclude an alliance which might incite Quraysh to a war of aggression, as much as it was designed to achieve peace and security. Muhammad had informed his uncle that, together with some members of Banu al-Muttalib and Banu Hashim, he had agreed with the new group from Yathrib that they would protect him personally. Anxious to strengthen his nephew and people against a war whose losses might fall heavily upon Banu Hashim and Banu al-Muttalib, Abbas sought to make sure that among this group from Yathrib he would find real helpers and allies. Consequently, he was the first one to open the discussion. He said, "O men from Khazraj, Muhammad's eminence and prestige among us are known to you. We have protected him even against those of his own people who think as highly of him as we do. Among us, he stands strong and secure, but he insists on joining your party. If you find yourselves capable of fulfilling toward him what you have promised, then you may proceed. But if you would betray him and send him over to his enemies once he has joined your party, you had better now say so and leave him alone." After hearing this speech of Abbas, the men from Yathrib said, "We have heard what you said, O Abbas." And turning to the Prophet, they continued, "O Prophet, speak out and choose for yourself and your Lord what you desire." Prophet Muhammad, after reciting some verses from the Qur'an, preached his faith in God in moving terms. He then said to the men from Yathrib, "I covenant with you on the condition that you will protect me against all, just as you would protect your women and children." Al-Bara said, "We have covenanted with you, O Prophet. By God, we are men of many wars. We are men of the sword, having inherited it from father unto son." Before Al-Bara finished his words, Abu al-Haytham said, "O Prophet, there are pacts between us and some Jews which we are going to denounce. Should your cause succeed later, or among your own tribe, would you return to them and leave us alone?" Muhammad smiled and said, "No, rather, your blood is my blood, and your destruction is my destruction. You are of me, and I am of you. I shall fight whomsoever you fight, and make peace with whomsoever you will make peace." The people were about to rise and give covenant to Muhammad, when Abbas interrupted and said, "O men of Khazraj, are you fully aware of what you are about to covenant with this man? You are about to covenant with him to make war against all sorts of men without discrimination. If you have any fear that, should you lose your wealth, and should your leaders fall by the sword, you might betray Muhammad, say so now and withdraw from this covenant. For if you do not, and then betray your oath, you will have lost in this world as well as the next. But if you feel certain that you can stand by him and fulfill this oath, notwithstanding the loss of your property and the murder of your dear ones, then go ahead and covenant with him. He is, by God, the best gain in this world and in the next." All the people present answered together, "We take him despite all threats to property, wealth, and life. Tell us, O Prophet, what will be our reward if we remain true to this oath?" He answered, "Paradise." They stretched out their hands to him, and he to them, and the covenant was concluded. Thereafter, the Prophet said, "Elect among yourselves 12 representatives who will be responsible to me regarding your behavior and conduct." After they elected 9 from Al-Khazraj and 3 from Al-Aus, the Prophet addressed them in the following words: "You are the guarantors of your people, just as the disciples were guarantors of theirs before Jesus, son of Mary. I, for my part, am the guarantor of my people." Such was their second covenant, which included the words, "We have covenanted to listen and to obey in health and in sickness, in fortune and misfortune, to tell the truth wherever we might be, and, at all times, to fear none in the cause of God."